Okay, so let me get this straight. The same Justice Department that spent years screaming about being the victim of weaponization just created a fund worth $1.776 billion. To pay who? Convicted January 6th rioters. Roger Stone, Michael Cohen. And that number? It's the year of the American Revolution. They aren't even being subtle anymore. And taxpayers? We foot the bill. Watch Rep. Garcia break down who cashes in. Subscribe now so you don't miss the breakdown.
Turning now to the bipartisan backlash that Trump faces as he tries to get us, the taxpayers, to foot the bill for payouts for people like convicted January 6th rioters. The Justice Department announced it was establishing this $1.776 billion fund, a not-so-subtle wink-wink, nod-nod to the American Revolution and all the imagery that those rioters used at the Capitol when they tried to overturn a legitimate election. And this so-called anti-weaponization fund all comes after Trump dismissed his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS over his leaked tax returns. The DOJ claims this fund is going to help victims of government weaponization. And here are some of the familiar faces who are now going to try to grab some of that cash. Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, former Trump ally Roger Stone, and extremist Proud Boys like Enrique Tarrio. And you know, according to Vice President Vance, some of those folks who were at the January 6th insurrection or protest, as he likes to call it, they haven't received a lot of sympathy.
You know who never, ever gets an ounce of sympathy when it comes to that disproportionate sentencing is people who voted for Donald Trump and participated in the January 6th protest. What were they accused of? Maybe they did something bad even, but what they were accused of was way worse of what they actually did. Maybe they had their entire lives ruined in a totally disproportionate way. That's fundamentally illegitimate and political.
Well, I'm going to help the vice president out there on the question of what were they accused of. Assaulting law enforcement, sedition. And legal challenges are, of course, already underway now. And the outrage is building across party lines. Senator Mitch McConnell blasting all of this as utterly stupid, morally wrong. And here was Senator Thom Tillis this morning.
As I said earlier, I stand by it. It's stupid on stilts. I call it a payout pot for punks. You just can't have those two equivalent numbers at the same time. It makes no sense. So it's politically tone deaf. Whoever did it should be fired. Let's figure out a way to help people who are victims of warfare, but not people who are convicted by a jury of their peers or pled guilty to assaulting a police officer. Please.
Democrats are already working toward putting a stop to it. Congressman Jamie Raskin introduced a bill barring the use of any federal funds to back the settlement and to create restrictions for payouts. And ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Congressman Robert Garcia, says oversight Democrats, they're going to take the lead on investigating who receives any money from this Trump fund. And Congressman Robert Garcia joins us right now. Congressman, it's good to have you back on the show. So first, can this fund be created and dispersed without congressional approval?
Look, that's a question that we are going to be pushing and pushing also through the court system. It's why Jamie Raskin is taking the lead also on legislation, of which, surprisingly, there are more and more Republicans that seem actually interested in actually taking on Trump on this issue. And then the piece that Oversight's looking at is we're going to make it very clear that anyone that takes a cent from this fund, we are going to investigate why, how, and if there's been any sort of coordination. It is crazy that we're going to sit here and allow Donald Trump to steal the American taxpayer dollar and then give it away to his friends, election deniers, people that attack the Capitol, and God knows who else. Of all the corrupt, horrific things that Donald Trump has done, I mean, this is at or near the top of the list. And it's refreshing to at least see some Republicans actually denounce this. And what we're saying is, Speaker Johnson, Leader Thune, this is an opportunity for you to actually do the right thing and finally stand up to this rogue authoritarian president.
Congressman Garcia, you mentioned the issue of coordination. Why is that an issue of importance? What would that suggest to you if you are investigating people who received this and whether or not there was any coordination with the administration for this fund?
Well, look, I mean, you take one step back, and Donald Trump is basically negotiating with himself. And this idea that what he was doing through Treasury, the way he was essentially using the White House to get himself richer, and then instead comes out with this fund. We have no idea who actually helped him create the fund, if he had people in mind, were there outside forces pushing it, and if he's actually already either promised this money, for example, the January 6ers. And so we may have a hard time getting the president to come in and sit in front of Congress to answer these questions. But you best believe that if you are going to take a penny from this fund, we're going to ask the tough questions about whether you coordinated with the president, whether there is illegal activity in that coordination, and if you actually promised anything by the government. So all of that is on the table, and I think Democrats have to be very aggressive in investigating not just this fund, but all the Trump family corruption.
Congressman Garcia, speaking of unseemly disbursements of cash and at least a whiff of potential corruption, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, it was disclosed, gave $5 million to House Republicans before testifying over his relationship with Epstein. I'm wondering if you think your fellow lawmakers should have accepted that money. And do you think there's any evidence that they have or are pulling their punches as a result of that donation?
Yeah, look, Howard Lutnick is a fraud. He's a liar. He's been untruthful. He's stood in front of the American media multiple times and said he didn't know who Jeffrey Epstein was, had no contact with him after 2005, and yet went to his island, now we know, communicated with him and through his wife and himself, now we know, went into a business investment with them, and actually communicated directly while lying to the American public. And this donation, by the way, it's really important folks know, was made after he knew that he would testify in front of the committee and before his actual testimony to the committee, unbeknownst, by the way, to any of us. And it's no surprise that Chairman Comer chose not to have that interview public and videotaped and released to the American public. And at the same time, did not require Howard Lutnick to be under oath during that transcribed interview, even though we pushed it aggressively. And so, look, this is all part of the games. It's all part of the White House cover-up. Howard Lutnick should be fired or should resign. In fact, we've all the entire group of oversight Democrats called on his resignation. And this is, again, points to a massive cover-up at the very top of the White House.
Just to clarify, are you suggesting that you think your colleagues, such as Congressman Comer, made those concessions explicitly because they received a donation from Secretary Lutnick?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, look, what all signs continue to point back to the White House on anything Jeffrey Epstein. They all point back to a cover-up. They all point back to the Republican Party covering for Donald Trump. I mean, they haven't released half of the Epstein files. 50%, 2.5 million documents are still in the possession of the DOJ. And you have Todd Blanche saying that they're done, they're moving on. The president calling it a hoax, and Mike Johnson could really care less about any sort of justice for the survivors. So nothing surprises me anymore as it relates to this massive Jeffrey Epstein cover-up. And we know this entire time the Republican Party is more interested in protecting Donald Trump, pedophiles, and his billionaire friends than any sort of justice for survivors.
Well, Congressman, we know that former Attorney General Pam Bondi is going to testify in just a few days on May 29th. What are your top-line questions for her?
I mean, thank God she finally decided to testify after the subpoena we put in place. And it's interesting that only 45 minutes after we filed contempt charges against her in the Congress, that she then agree and release a date to actually come back in to testify. So, look, we've been preparing. This is a very important moment. We've been talking with the survivors directly. They have actually sent us questions. What we want to know is why did you try to bury this investigation? Who were you taking direction from? Why haven't you released 50% of the files? Why did you dox and put in danger so many survivors and re-traumatize them by releasing their personal information? Why wouldn't you meet with the survivors? What has Donald Trump asked you to hide or to do? These are critical questions, and I would hope, now that Pam Bondi is no longer the AG, that she'd be willing to at least be a little bit more truthful. So we'll wait and see, but we're looking forward to that interview in just under a week.
All right, Congressman Robert Garcia, it's great to see you as always. Thank you so much for joining.
All right, so let's talk about what just happened. If you watched that clip and felt your jaw tighten a little, good. That means you're paying attention. What you just saw was the federal government, meaning you, the taxpayer, announcing it's going to hand out nearly $2 billion to people the court's already convicted. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The loudest pushback in that clip isn't coming from the left. That's Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican, calling this thing stupid on stilts and a payout pot for punks. When members of the president's own party are reaching for language like that on camera, that's not a talking point. That's a 5-alarm fire. So let's lay out the actual receipts. The Justice Department has set up a fund worth $1.776 billion. And the timing tells the whole story. This landed right after Trump dismissed his own $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS over his leaked tax returns. Follow that sequence. He drops a personal lawsuit, and almost immediately, a federal fund appears, ready to pay victims of government weaponization. And who are those victims? The reporting names familiar faces. Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, longtime ally Roger Stone, Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, people convicted by juries, people who pleaded guilty to assaulting officers. Now first, in line for a taxpayer-funded check. And here's the line from that clip I can't stop thinking about. Rep. Robert Garcia said Trump is, quote, basically negotiating with himself. Sit with that for a second. The administration runs the Justice Department. The administration decides who counts as a victim. The administration controls the money, and the administration is full of the exact people who'd collect it. There's no opposing side at that table, no neutral judge. It's Trump on one side, Trump on the other, and you holding the invoice. That's not a settlement. A settlement needs two parties. This is one man writing himself a check and calling it justice. And if you think I'm the one spinning this, look at who else is sounding the alarm. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, not exactly a member of the resistance, called this fund utterly stupid and morally wrong. Let that sink in. The most senior Republican in the Senate looked at his own party's Justice Department and used the words morally wrong. He's now part of a growing bipartisan group, worried about both the fiscal hole this blows and the precedent it sets. And the precedent is the scary part. Once you can slap the label weaponization on any prosecution and pay the convicted, there's basically no crime a loyalist can commit that the government can't just buy back. Now here's where it gets darker. Watch this stretch of the clip closely. Garcia points out that nobody actually knows who built this fund. Were there outside forces pushing for it? Was anyone promised money before it even existed? We don't know. And that's exactly the problem. So oversight Democrats are drawing a hard line. Anyone who takes a single cent gets investigated. How? Why? And whether they coordinated with the administration to get it. Because if you were promised a payout before the fund was even announced, that's not compensation. That's a reward. And rewarding political loyalty with public money has a much older, much uglier name than anti-weaponization fund. So what can anyone actually do about this? That's where Rep. Jamie Raskin comes in. Raskin and House Democrats have introduced legislation to do one very specific thing: legally bar any federal appropriations from backing this settlement, with hard limits and full disclosure on every dollar that moves. Translation: if it passes, the fund can't quietly hand out money in the dark. Every payment gets a name attached to it. And here's what the administration didn't plan for. Republicans are signing on. The reporting says more and more of them are interested in actually taking Trump on over this. When your own party starts co-sponsoring the bill to stop you, the cover story has officially fallen apart. And then there's the Lutnick problem, which Garcia walks through near the end of that clip. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick testified about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. He claimed he had no contact with Epstein after 2005. Then the files showed he visited the island, communicated directly, even went into a business investment with him. That's not a fuzzy memory. That's a documented contradiction. And Garcia didn't soften it. He called Lutnick a fraud and a liar on camera and said he should resign or be fired. Meanwhile, former Attorney General Pam Bondi is finally set to testify on May 29th, 45 minutes after the subpoena was filed. 45 minutes. Funny how fast things move once the gavel actually comes down. And this is the one that ties the whole thing together. Newly disclosed campaign finance records show Howard Lutnick transferred $5 million to key House Republican fundraising arms. Shortly before he testified about Epstein, read that timeline again. The money moved. Then he sat down in front of the committee that decides how hard to push him. Oversight Democrats are now demanding an investigation into that timing. And honestly, you don't need a forensic accountant to see the shape of it. So here's the line. If anyone tells you this fund is about justice, you say this: the government is paying convicted rioters with your tax dollars. The man running it is negotiating with himself. His own party calls it morally wrong, and a cabinet secretary cut a $5 million check right before his own testimony. That's not justice. That's a payout pot with better branding. If this breakdown helped you see what's really going on, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the full picture. I'm Donald Taylor. I'll see you in the next one.